Hey, welcome back to the Game Changer podcast. I am excited for another episode where we get to talk about living on purpose and leading on purpose. And we get to talk to individuals who are living out their purpose in a variety of ways. And can I just tell you, I'm excited for today's episode because I get to connect with a brother who I met years ago. And in the last year, got reconnected through an event and just inspired by his story, what God has done in his life. And I mean, when you hear his story, you're going to be just blown away. But he's a father. He's a leader of a nonprofit in inner city. He's got 4 children, 3 girls, 1 boy. He's also the chaplain for the Kansas City Chiefs, the Super Bowl winning, back-to-back Super Bowl winning Kansas City Chiefs. Been playing that role for a while. And so I'm excited to invite my friend Marcellus Casey to the podcast, bro. Thanks for being a part of this.
Oh, it's my joy, man. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, well, I'm excited to jump into your story. And so many aspects of your story, I feel like connect with my story and just kind of my upbringing. And so I'd love for you to talk about just your upbringing. I know your dad was a pastor. You guys were in the inner city context. He did some sports ministry. Talk to us just about your upbringing and how that started to shape your perspective and paradigm when it came to maybe what God would call you to.
Yeah, I think, I think having the parents that I had gave me a good framework and a good picture of like kind of what it was, a good picture of what I wanted to be.
Yep.
And so like, I mean, honestly, it was kind of like the Cosby Show, you know, it was like kind of you have a vision and see what it is you want to be, you know, and as you grow up and you grow old, you kind of get to know, you know, what's real and what's not. But it's still, you know, no matter how we cut it, all of us grew and learned a lot from the Cosby Show, you know. Yeah. So like so with the father that I had, like I got to see him do a lot of ministry, how he carried himself with people, how he talked to people. My mom is a lifetime educator, so I learned a lot from her as far as like, man, just empathy and how to connect with people. So that really served me well as I was trying to learn at an early age what it meant to be a chaplain, because I actually became a football chaplain when I was 20 years old. So that was my junior year of college. Wow. And I actually quit my college football team 2 weeks before practice of my junior year.
Wow.
And became our team chaplain. So I had to learn kind of quick like what it meant to relate to people. And I had already, as a player, I had already been leading Bible studies, doing things like that. But then, you know, as my coach and I kind of shaped that role together, we kind of had to learn by trial and error. But I was able to lean back on things that I learned from my childhood for sure.
Wow. Which is so, you know, I think about that as you talk about your father and your mother and how that kind of painted a picture for you. And I had a similar experience in the sense of seeing my parents just pursue purpose and not chase just a job, not just chase money. And it was like, even though it cost our family moving to an inner city context, they were chasing purpose. And I knew I wanted to live on purpose. I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I knew I wanted to live on purpose. And so, you know, I think a lot of people don't grow up with that perspective, or you've got parents who are really pursuing that type of lifestyle. So I just think we're definitely very fortunate to have seen that at a young age. And I mean, at 20, you're starting to lead other people. That's big time. What was it that caused you to lean into that at such a young age, kind of, you know, stepping back from football and starting to pursue just investing in others through this chaplain role?
I mean, honestly, I wish I had more like leadership lesson than this, but like really it's just the Holy Spirit. I mean, it was just God just snatching me up. Like, cause it's not something I wanted to do. I always wanted to be a coach. Okay. It's something I wanted to finish my eligibility and play football, you know, and I was competing for a spot on our roster, and I really did not want to do anything other than that with my life, and God said otherwise and snatched me up. So
Come on, man.
And I tell people all the time with young people, especially working with athletes, so they hear my story and I'm like, yeah, man, I quit 2 weeks before practice. I tell you all the time, don't do that. Like, unless God
Don't
telling
do what
you
I
to do
did.
that. Yeah, and you know, I also don't want people to kind of carry that like that religious
Yeah.
responsibility, like, oh well, if he did it, then if I'm gonna be a good Christian, then I better just quit. Like, no, like God has a ton of purpose within sports, and God, but
Yes.
for some
Yes.
particular reason, he decided to snatch me up out of that and put me in something different.
That's right.
And I've had all that peace about that. I've always known that that's what
Mm,
I wanted to do. But I don't want people to look at that story and be like, oh, that's the
right.
only path that God would have for a believer. It's like, nah,
Yep.
there's a ton of purpose in other places. So yeah.
That's good. Yeah, we're not telling everybody quit sports and pursue God's call on your life. I love what you
Right.
said though, because it looks different for everybody.
Yeah, it
And
really does.
I mean, I look at my life and I've said before some of the decisions that my wife and I have made where we felt like it was out of obedience to God's spirit.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yep.
it wasn't like this master plan, man. We drew up all these things we wanted to do, and then we followed that plan. It was like, no, felt like God was leading us in this direction. And I think that's important too, though, when I think about purpose, because obedience is the most important factor when it
For
comes to
sure.
following God's plan for our life.
For sure. Yes, I feel like there has to be radical obedience, and I think that looks different for everybody because
Yep.
I do try to warn people because I work with professional athletes, I work with business leaders, I
Yep.
work with inner city youth, I work with like all kinds of people, and it's like, for some people, obedience is starting a business
Yep.
and making a lot of money. Like the Bible
Yes.
never condemns being wealthy. The
No.
Bible never condemns being a great leader. The
Yes.
Bible never condemns being ambitious. The Bible
Yep.
condemns being selfishly ambitious or to
Yep.
be greedy,
Mm.
or it doesn't say that money is the root of all evil. It says the love of money is the root of
Yep.
all evil. And
Good.
so I do believe that for each person, what you have to ask the Holy Spirit, like, what does obedience look like? And for some people, it's like
Good.
God's calling me to start this business or to start this school or to go on a missions trip or to,
Yep.
make different investments. And it feels risky, it feels scary, but it's like,
Mm.
man, that's God telling me to do that. And
That's right.
so I just don't want people to look like there's a spiritual A team and a spiritual B team, like all
Mm.
pastors and missionaries and nonprofit leaders. That's like kind of the A team because they're doing something that looks kind of radical
That's
and
good.
is maybe fits more of examples of like what we see
Mm.
in the Bible or things like
That's
that.
good.
But it's like, no, like there's things that God's called you to do. Start an AAU team, coach a team,
Yep.
coach your kids' youth sports, like
Yep.
all kinds of calling and ministries out
Mm.
there.
Bro, so good. I couldn't agree more. And that's my hope, is that even with the diversity of people that are listening to this podcast, from business leaders to stay-at-home parents to AAU coaches to athletes, whatever it is, man, the heart and hope is that they would be obedient to whatever God is saying and doing, and lean into that purpose. Somebody looks at you today and you've been with the Kansas City Chiefs. How long have you been with the Chiefs? 7 years?
This is
8
my
years?
eighth season. Yeah.
Eighth season. You've got how many rings?
3.
3. Man, and I got to sit by you and see one of those rings. You got the legit rings, and I saw you were at the recent, ring ceremony. So cool to see
Mm-hmm.
where you are. But obviously, there's been a journey between that 20-year-old Marcellus saying yes and being obedient at the college level to
Right.
now pastoring, some of the best athletes in the world. Talk about that journey. What have been some of the challenges in that journey? What have been some of the experiences that have really marked your journey in going from that 20-year-old to where you are today?
Yeah. I think a couple things that marked my journey were my college coach, Mel Churchma, was a winner.
Okay.
And so I got to see excellence at the NCAA Division II level at Northwest Missouri State University. The way our coach treated us, the way he carried out his business as a man.
Wow.
No matter how late we would get back from a road game, he was going to be in Sunday school the next morning. So we had
Wow.
no excuse not to show up to church, and it wasn't a Christian school. So, and
Love that.
then I was a chaplain at University of Illinois at the Division I level under head coach Ron Zook
Yep.
for football, and then Bruce Weber for basketball. And so, with Coach Zook coming in, he came from University of Florida to Illinois. So I was in
Okay.
Illinois for as a chaplain from '05 to 11.
Okay.
And Coach Zook, man, I mean, we lost a ton of games.
Mm.
And so going through those dog days of losing and losing and losing and seeing Coach Zook's tenacity for excellence and what
Wow.
he was requiring, and then to get all the way to the point where we went to the Rose Bowl and played against USC.
Wow.
So I think when people see me and they're like, "Oh, you have 3 Super Bowl rings and you've been with the Chiefs," and like, oh, you the only thing you've known since you've been there is Patrick Mahomes, and
Right.
like,
Right.
which is true. Like my kids only know winning,
Yeah.
and they're like, oh, we come over from the game, they're like, oh, you guys won, right? Like that's all they think.
That's what they
So
expect. They don't expect anything
yeah,
different. Yeah.
yeah, we'll be doing family planning, and they're like, so can we do this vacation like after the Super Bowl? I'm like, hey, we hadn't even got to the playoffs yet. Like, you need to chill out. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know what the bird's gonna look like.
Yep.
But I think that people look at that and they expect you to like, oh, well, you've just always been around winning teams, and that's the easy way to be a chaplain. But it's like, no, I've actually been a chaplain like with a lot of losing seasons,
Yep.
and there's a lot of ministry there, and there's a ton of ministry when you're winning, and
Yep.
so I think those are the biggest things I've learned is from Mel Churchma at Northwest Missouri State, from
Mm.
Ron Zook at Illinois, and then seeing how Coach Reed and the rest of our coaches and our ownership at the Chiefs, how they carry themselves, how they go about striving for excellence
Wow.
and demanding excellence from the
Mm.
people that surround them.
Wow. So good, man. One of the things I love about your story is even today, you're not just working at that level with the Chiefs, you're running a nonprofit in the inner city
Yep.
and focused on boxing. And so you're working, at different levels with different people in different spaces. You told a story last time I listened to you speak about when God moved you guys to, I think, where you're at today, kind of in the inner city
Yeah.
context and that transition.
Yeah.
I mean, you talk about obedience. Tell
Right.
us, just kind of share that story and then talk about some of the work that you're doing right now in that context with boxing and with the young people you're working with.
Yeah. So in 2019, we executed a decision that God had been working in our hearts for a long time.
Mm.
I think at that point we had been married about 14 years. We've been married 19 years now. So, yeah, 13 or 14 years. And man, long story short, we lived in one of the nicest parts of Kansas City. It's Brookside. It's near the plaza.
Yep.
It's beautiful. It's
Mm.
close to our kids' elementary school. We had a little walking trail and Whole Foods and all that kind of
Come on.
stuff. And then we just felt like we felt like God was calling our family to live in the inner city. And
Wow.
I had already done that as a kid. My wife and my 4 kids had never lived in the inner city. And so we bought a house, we moved over here, and we've just seen God's faithfulness over and over. And our kids have seen a lot of stuff. They've seen some scary stuff. They hear
Yep.
some scary stuff. There's things that have gone on around our home, and there's stuff we see every day. But at the same time, seeing lives change and seeing people that want better for themselves.
Yep.
And also, man, when we moved over here, we were really humbled by people that have already lived here for decades and have already been doing the work. So like,
Right.
we try to stay away from having like kind of like a savior mentality or like, oh, once we got here, everything started getting better. It's like,
Right.
no, there's actually been people in this part of the city for a long time. A lot of Black churches, a lot of Black pastors, a lot of community leaders, a lot of people that have been pouring in.
That's good.
And so to be able to engage and join a legacy of folks that care about this community and have cared about this community for a long time is a humbling and joyful thing to engage in.
Man, so cool that you'd be again willing and not just you, but your wife. Obviously, that's a joint decision. You don't make any of those decisions by yourself. And so the
Right.
faith of being able to make that decision, move closer towards God. I mean, the Bible talks about this. I believe it. man, God honors obedience.
Mm-hmm.
And I think in your story, your obedience at a young age, 20, and then, the small things. And then there's things like moving and the obedience in that and walking in faith. And thank God, obviously the Bible talks about those who are faithful with little, more will be given. And so just your consistent faithfulness, obedience, God's faithfulness, and you guys walking in that is a testament in and of itself. Talk about the work
Mm-hmm.
you're doing with your nonprofit in that context, using boxing as a tool to really develop that next generation.
Yeah, so right after we moved here, we started a small boxing gym in 2020, and
What was your connection to boxing?
there's a young guy that I have mentored since 2016, and he was a boxer,
Okay.
and also I had when I was working with Fellowship of Christian Athletes, I had an administrative assistant who was a young guy, so he was a young guy that I hired out of college. He played football at South Dakota State, and he was a
Okay.
boxer. So he
Okay.
actually taught me a ton about boxing, introduced me to my friend Chris,
Hmm.
that I've mentored and discipled over the years.
Yep.
And then so I've never actually had a fight. I don't fight people but I'm very intrigued by the sport. I love to
Yeah.
train in the sport, and I've learned a lot how to throw combinations and defense and all
Yeah.
that kind of stuff. And then just what it does for young people, it develops a ton of, it's different than any other sport, because a lot
Hmm.
of times when you're coaching a kid, you're standing right in front of them,
Right.
and you got this eye to eye contact with them,
Hmm.
and there's just a trust that's developed. And I think a lot of
Yeah.
coaches experience that, but again, with boxing, a lot of times you're just right in front of each other,
Hmm.
and there's a relational trust that's given. And
Yep.
anybody that's trying to do ministry, and I coach my son's flag football team too,
Okay. Okay.
and I really believe if you're a pastor and you're listening to this, every
Yep.
pastor needs to coach something. Like, I don't care what, it could be field hockey, water polo,
Yes. Come on.
Olympic break dancing, whatever. Like,
Yes.
coach something,
Yeah.
and or find ways to be in the community.
That's right.
And so what boxing has done for me is it just keeps me in the community.
It's good.
It keeps me smelling like the sheep that
Hmm.
I want to lead, and I think more pastors and more ministry leaders need that
Man.
kind of context. Like, get out of, I know sermon prepping is important, and you got
Man.
to get the Greek and the Hebrew and all that, but like, man, you got to get out in the community, be a hospital chaplain, do something. Just get out there and get out of the four walls of your building and see what God is doing in other places.
Man.
So yeah.
That's one of the things that I love about what you're doing at that level in the boxing with your nonprofit. You're in the community, you're working with people, you're coaching your son's flag football, you got a connection to the community. But even with Kansas City Chiefs, I mean, you are in the world, you're with the people
Right,
who are
right,
some of the biggest influencers in the world, and God's
right.
using you to influence them. A mentor of mine, Dave Gibbons, talks about this idea of being content with being the number two person, being second. And he
Mm-hmm.
talks about the power of when you can influence those who have incredible influence, the
Mm-hmm.
ripple effect of that influence goes way beyond you. And so many people are trying to be the face and the voice and the speaker. And it's like, man, what if God
Right.
just wants you to be an encouragement or an influence on somebody else who he uses their
Yes.
voice? And so
Yes.
that's one of the things I love about your story. Hey, as you're working with these high level athletes, I mean, these guys got coaches that coach them for nutrition and mindset and skills,
Right.
and you're coming in and you're coaching them with what we believe matters most, their heart and who they're becoming. What's your strategy, philosophy in helping them reach their God-given potential and being
Mm-hmm.
connected to God's plan for their life?
Yeah, it's funny because we were at a Chiefs event yesterday. One of our players did like a back to school rally and was giving away school supplies. And
Yep.
so my boxing gym, we had a table set up,
Mm.
to advertise and talk to other kids in the neighborhood and things like that. And so one of my boxers was like, man, what is it like working with these athletes and blah, blah, blah. And I told him, I'm like, man, I talk to them just like I talk to you.
That's
Like,
right.
it's the same stuff. They ask me the same kind of questions you ask me,
Yep.
and a lot of them, have similar stories and similar background and things like
Mm.
that. And I told them, I was like, money doesn't make their life any easier than yours. And I told them,
Man.
like, in fact, in many ways, it complicates their lives
Yep.
10 times more. And
Yep.
so, and it really is like, it keeps me humble and keeps me fresh because, again, stories are very similar,
Yep.
and the questions are that they each ask are very similar.
Mm.
And as I get older, those age gaps are closing, as far
Yep.
as like um my boxers ages and the Chiefs players ages. And so man,
Mm.
I think I just try to love our players and our coaches where they're at. And
Yep.
they're just real people, man. And
Yep.
they work hard. They have, they worry about their kids just like I worry about my kids.
Yep.
And just really what I try to do is just stick with the word of God, man, and
Mm.
just really disciple people. And like
Yep.
uh and there's some leadership stuff that I'll dive into with guys. One time we did a study on the five dysfunctions of a team,
Yep.
and just different leadership resources that I'll give guys.
It's
But I
good.
really do try to just keep it simple and keep it locked in on God's word, because I really do want people to know Jesus.
Yep.
And at the same time, it's crazy because most of our guys with that are very competitive, or
Yep.
like, I shouldn't say competitive, they're very driven. So
Mm.
like this summer, one of our players that I've been discipling, he's going on vacation, and I've been going through a Bible study with he and his wife, and
Mm.
we read all of Genesis.
Wow.
We were halfway through Exodus, and then I was like, hey man, like, I'm gonna pull back on you guys reading, because I had them reading like 10, 12, 13 chapters at a
Wow.
time, just because we were in the arc of the story of different things happening in Genesis. Long story short, I'm like, hey man, since you guys are going on vacation, I'll pull back on how much you're reading. And he looked at me confused, like, he's like, why would you do that? And like,
Yeah.
like when they get in that competitive mindset, like I had one of our players, like, big name player. If I said his name, you guys would all know who he is. And he texted
Yeah.
me this morning. He's like, hey man, I finished the book of Acts. What do you want me to read now?
Come
Like,
on,
it's
man.
like that. Like, I'm just like, once
Yes.
they're on, they're gonna be,
Wow.
just like, give me all of it, and
Come
so
on, man.
it is
Yes.
fun to view, like, you're not pulling teeth. You're not like,
Mm.
these are grown men that, like, man, when they're ready to do something. So it's nice to not feel like you have to like water things down, or like
Right.
make, I think so much of Western American Christianity, we're like, okay, here's like the smallest, chunk of scripture, or the smallest
Yes.
devotional,
We
or
lower the standard.
I know. And so I
Man.
hate when people suggest a book to me and they're like, oh, it's a real easy read. It's a short read. It's like,
Mm.
why do I want to read something that's like easy to read? Or like,
Man.
I want something that's a challenge, you know what I mean? And I feel
Come
like that's
on.
how a lot of our guys are. Is like, man, like anything I throw at them is like,
Yes.
especially for the ones that are really wanting to be discipled and really
Yep.
wanting to follow. They're like, hey, just give me all of it.
Man.
Don't water it down. They
I mean,
ask
I
big, challenging
that's
questions
so
about God
good.
and the Bible. Yeah,
That's so good,
yeah,
bro. Like, I mean,
yeah.
I've said before, I think, and with good intention, we want to make it easy for everybody. And we're like, man, if you just read one verse, or if you just do one devotional. And
Right,
I had the revelation, in what in any other area of life do people tell us to do the minimum? Like,
right,
what if they told the
right,
football player, man, just be minimum, like just put in minimum
right,
effort, or the business leader, or
right,
the in nowhere else in life are we asked to do the minimum, but sometimes our standard is, oh man, just do a little bit. And it's like we're getting little results because we got little
right,
standards. And
right, right, right.
I love that the guys you're working with have that standard. Hey, last two things. You're getting ready for the Super Bowl, and God gives you a word for the team. You don't have to go through the whole word. I love the word that you gave, but God gives you a word. Tell us the word God gave you for this team as you're getting ready for the Super Bowl. And then number two, just for my own and for my 10-year or 12-year-old son, what's it like working with Patrick Mahomes? Those are my last two questions.
Yeah. So Super Bowl 57. I'll answer the last one first, man. Working with Patrick's great, and like I said, like, he's one of those guys that, like, when I'm putting him on reading, he's eating it up.
Dialed
And
in.
so Yeah, dialed in, man. And he's just a humble guy. Like,
Mm,
and his wife Brittany, like they're just good, humble people. And like
mm.
obviously, like they live a different lifestyle than most of us do.
Yo.
But man, they got good hearts for the community. They're very involved in the community.
Mm.
Just great, humble parents, man, and just
Wow.
good people, man. So I
Love
love I
that.
love working with him, man. He's a great dude.
Mm.
Never misses chapel. I think I've been here. Yeah, this is my eighth season. I really I cannot think of more than one chapel pregame that he's missed since
Wow.
I've been doing chapels.
Wow.
But yeah, maybe one. At the most, maybe two, but I can't think of the second one because the one
Wow.
that I remember him missing was with a specific injury that he had. But other
Yep.
than that, like he's there, front row.
Wow. Come on.
So yeah, Super Bowl 57, we played the Eagles, man. I was really wrestling with like what to share with our team and we were going through a series. So whenever we get to the playoffs, I build a series as if we're going to the Super Bowl.
Wow.
So this year, that year that we played the Eagles, I built a series around faith, family, and football.
Mm.
And so I think that year, yeah, we got the one seed. So I had three messages.
Yeah.
Faith was, divisional round. Family was AFC Championship,
Yep.
and football was gonna be. So I do like a series in the regular season, and whatever I do in the playoffs, I try to build it like the only way we're gonna finish this series is if we go to the Super Bowl.
Yeah. I love
So
that.
yeah. And it's not like trying to be egotistical, like we are going to the Super Bowl, but it's like, hey, let's
Yeah.
like work for it, like let's build towards it. So anyway, so it was faith family football. I got to football, and my point with that message was basically God working in our work.
Mm.
So we have faith, that's the number one priority, our belief in God. We have family, that's the people, not only our biological family, but the community of people that we do life with. And
Yep.
then football was all about vocation. Like, what is the work that God has called you to, and why is that important to the world?
Mm.
And so
Good.
God gave me that He wanted me to share the Lion King with them based off of yeah, based off of Simba being pulled away from his work
Mm.
because of the lies. So like he's born into the kingdom, and his dad gives him vision, gives him boundaries. Then he incurs a wound in his life from his uncle Scar, who lied to him. Then he runs away from his calling. He runs away from his kingdom, and there's people in his life that help him be very comfortable, Timon and Pumbaa, and they
Yep.
don't necessarily care about his calling or where he should go. They're just like, hey, just stay locked in this comfort. And
Mm.
so a lot of times our wounds, our scars lock us into comfort
Come
versus
on.
pursuing the calling and the purpose that God has for us.
Mm.
And ultimately, as he heard his father's voice say to him, hey, remember who you are, he went back to his calling. As Christians, we have a better voice from heaven in the same way that God the Father spoke to his son Jesus
Come
from
on.
heaven and said, this is my son whom I love, with him I'm well pleased.
Mm.
And while Jesus was being baptized by his cousin John the Baptist, I know you told me not to do the whole thing about it,
Hey,
but now
come
I'm preaching.
on.
You can't ask a preacher not to
Come
preach.
on, man.
So, so, so when God the Father spoke to his son Jesus while Jesus was being baptized, and right before Jesus was about to be tempted and start his ministry,
Yeah.
he's like, hey, this is who you are. So before you go through temptation, before you go through ministry, let me
Mm.
tell you who you are. You're my son, whom I love, with whom I'm well pleased. And when
Wow.
we have faith in Jesus and our identity's placed in Jesus, that's our identity as well. We are children of God,
Come
and
on.
he loves us, and he's well pleased with us. So
Come
yeah.
on, man. Like, I mean, when I heard you share that at the event we were at, I had a whole new revelation for the Lion King. And just, it
Hmm.
was such a powerful real life story of what we all go through.
Yeah.
And the fact that God gave you that while you're getting ready, I mean, I just can imagine you show up, Super Bowl is right around the corner, and it's like, hey, I'm here to talk about the Lion King to get us ready.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
only God, man. Only God. You
Only
do,
God, man.
man, and you do such a great job. I love the story God's been telling through your life. I love your consistent obedience to lean in and follow. And not that any of us are perfect, but man, that obedience leads to God opening up doors and just incredible opportunities for your family and work. And then just the diversity of experiences you've had and continue to have with the Chiefs, with the boxing, nonprofit. I really, man, I love your story as a pastor's kid and just somebody who's communicated a lot. You're a great communicator. I told you, I can't wait to get you to Omaha for an event in the future. Ready. We're going to make it happen probably after the season.
It's so close, man. So close to Kansas City. And I can get some Runza. So
yeah, come on, man. We'll get as much Runza as you want. Well, hey, bro, I know this, as we get ready to hop off, people would love to get connected to you, whether it's bring you in as a speaker, podcast, sounds like consulting with business and people in all different spaces. What's the best way for people to connect with you?
Yeah, so my Instagram is @Marcellus Casey. So that's CELLUSCASEY. And then my email is marcellus.casey. So that's my first name, MARCELLUS.CASEY @gmail.
Cool. Man, well, I'm
on LinkedIn as well.
LinkedIn? Okay, cool. We'll make sure we put some of that information in the notes too, just so people can plug in, get connected. And bro, thank you. Thanks for the time. Thanks for sharing. I know people are going to be encouraged.
Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome. And thank you. This was a joy, man.
I appreciate it. Well, hey, for those listening, thanks for tuning in. I know you were encouraged, inspired, and hopefully more than anything, whether it was Marcellus's story or Simba's story, you could see your story and the story God's telling through your life and just how obedience to God's voice ultimately leads to us living and experiencing God's purpose. So thanks for tuning in. Hopefully you'll check out our previous episodes and can't wait to be a part of the next one together.